Hey, what is going on, everybody, and welcome to Fantasia. For today, we're going to be jumping into another session of Epic 7. Now, today, got some more balance adjustment previews for you guys. This time around, we are going to be taking a look at quite a few things. Now, you're looking here like, what are you talking about? There's not that many things. I would actually argue the opposite. I would say that this is actually a pretty good balance adjustment and something that I want to see more of moving forward. Now, I know the balance adjustment window is actually pretty long, and we recently got that huge wave of backlash against Smilegate for trying to do the Awaken Potential update, and they're going to be hopefully moving forward and tweaking the entire balance adjustment schedule as a result. Now, I do want to see smaller balance tweaks like this. I don't necessarily want to see a huge overhaul of like 8 units that are introduced into the meta every 8 weeks or so. That is going to be really difficult to keep up with. I know people complain about the game being like pay to win and stuff like that, even though it really, to an extent, like it is, but it also isn't. It's a lot about game knowledge and utilizing units and building correct teams, right? You have to be able to utilize what you have correctly in order to win in most cases. But with that said, though, if a balance adjustment comes out and it's overhauling the meta every few weeks, good luck keeping up if you're not a spender in the game. Even people who do spend in the game, like I'm a light spender with monthly packs, it's gonna be hard. So small tweaks like this I think are really nice to keep adjusting slightly for whatever is hot in the meta right now. Of course, ML Landy is still there, and she's pretty prevalent, so we see things like Lone Crest and Bologna coming in, DDR coming in as well, because well, I guess he was very inconsistent, but we're going to see that consistency is about to change. This is his main weakness and why he didn't really see a lot of play. DDR now I think is very comparable to something like Sharoon, but we'll talk about that in a second. Next up we have Araminta, and she is actually here because I know people were actually complaining about her detonating burns like Carrot does with her S1, so we'll talk about that. Some PvE adjustments are also very welcome. Broman here getting an adjustment, which is a little strange, but hey, people want 4 stars to get adjusted, and honestly, Broman is one of my favorite ML 4 stars in the entire game. If you're a veteran of this channel, you stuck around from years past, you know I love Broman, and I used him quite a bit, even in RTA back in the day. Next up we have Cirilla, another unit that I think is like a very popular fan unit for a couple reasons, and I think you know, we'll talk about her adjustment as well. Bastion, Perlucia, Durandal. I am a huge fan of artifact adjustments, even if they're a slight tweak, just to make them a bit more competitive with the newer artifacts coming out, and these artifacts didn't really stand up against their peers before anyway, so very much welcome here. And last but not least, we have an effect change. Much like we got Restrict kind of buffed in previous patches, we have Sleep buffed here as well, and that is actually something that I think makes this balance adjustment way bigger than people think that it is. It looks small on paper, but I think it's going to have some pretty lasting effects. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first unit here, Lone Crest and Bologna. I think this is a unit that people are saying doesn't really need a buff, and I feel like we had the similar conversation with Lionheart Sirmia. So people were saying Lionheart did not need the buff, and I can kind of agree on that back then, but after seeing her now, she's still struggling. She's not a very consistent unit into something like ML Landy, right? Even though she is picked very constantly into things like ML Landy. She is still good now. She's still relatively good and very strong in Guild Wars. Has a place in RTA. But yeah, I feel like Lone Crest and Bologna definitely could have used a slight tweak. If there was a unit that could have used a slight adjustment just to be a little bit better at their job in the current meta, I think she's definitely a contender. A lot of people have her. She's a really popular unit that a lot of people summon for, and ML Landy is a unit that people still complain about quite a bit, so why not adjust her to deal with the problem? The adjustment here is pretty simple, actually. She got a soul burn on her S1, took away the soul burn on her S3, so increased damage dealt on Soulburn S1 is actually pretty big. Bellona really had no way of increasing the damage output that she had, besides boosting her raw stats or giving her like vigor, attack buff, or crit damage buff. That was basically it. So if you didn't have an attack buffer on the team, good luck ramping up your damage outside of her passive. Speaking of her passive though, it's going to ramp up a lot faster now. She gains 20 fighting spirit every time an ally is attacked. And this is huge because it used to be 15 fighting spirit. When you gain 20 fighting spirit, it's essentially gaining 1 focus bar, right? So she essentially will proc as often as Seaside Bellona, which is pretty often. This is going to help her stack her attack even faster, and it's going to help her deal more damage, give her more combat readiness push. It's a very slight tweak, but it's going to be very impactful in the long run, especially when you're bringing her into units like Emma Landy, where AoEs, if Landy literally S1s and salvos into you, you're going to S2 back. And, you know, this can make or break matches where you're in Sigurd's Scythe range after getting hit by an S1 and a salvo. Now you got your Waxing Crescent S2 that can heal you back. So this is really, really nice. I think this is a huge change. That 5 fighting spirit, definitely notable. Moving on, we got her S3. So a lot of people are kind of conflicted on the S3, whether or not they want that Soulburn on the S1 for damage, or is the S3 better because you can't spam it as much now. And what I have to say about this is you do get a 1 cooldown reduction here, which is already not too bad. She will be turn cycling more with her S2, so do keep that in mind. You actually get faster turn cycling by taking more turns by the combat readiness boost you get there. And although they did, you know, reduce the souls because you get less cooldowns, you also get 20 fighting spirit instead of 30. So essentially, you're less reliant on using your Soulburn on the S3 repeatedly to make sure that you can get your S2 up. Your S2 is naturally going to be going up faster, so this S3 really didn't need that extra 10 fighting spirit here. You essentially gain 1 focus bar by using it, which is not bad. And they did increase the damage that's dealt. Now we have to see the data mine numbers before we can make a judgment on it here, but yeah, hopefully it's still going to be around the same ballpark as what it used to be, where if she had a buff before it increased the damage that was dealt. But yeah, Bellona, I think, is definitely going to be a pretty important unit moving forward. And again, I know a lot of people have her, so this will impact the majority of players. Next up, we have DDR, so quite opposite on the spectrum, I think. Not a lot of people have DDR because they don't really view him as a very versatile unit, and I do agree with that. Now, DDR here, actually, you guys know me, I'm a huge fan of DDR. I want to splash him into every game that I can. So, classic combos with DDR are like with Sharoon or with Solitaria, Paracaptain Flan, you know, units with AoEs and stuff that can put a lot of venom on the opponents, Bellion being another one. What we have here actually is DDR no longer detonates venom effects at the that inflict on the target at the end of the turn with his S1. Now, what he does is when he successfully attacks, now it's important to note he has to be successful in his attack, he will deal damage equivalent to 40% of injuries inflicted on the target. So he does not detonate here. He doesn't detonate. However, this is essentially what his S3 did. Now, it's not as big of a percentage as his S3. You can see the S3 used to do 80% of the target's injuries. Now it's 40%, but it's on his S1. It is super consistent now. You can just slap anybody that you want. You can pair him up with things like Emil Shu, Ilanov, and you're going to be dealing a lot of injury really, really fast. And poking people down with this, his S1's going to hit hard. It's actually going to become a killing skill rather than a skill that's used to control. What we see here with his S2, he no longer gains 50% combat readiness for himself. He will boost everybody up by 20% in general. And what we'll see is his Pestilence actually gets a slight little tweak. So instead of when whoever has the Pestilence buff attacks on their turn, you inflict venom for 2 turns. Now you inflict venom for 1 turn, but at the end of that turn, you detonate the venom effects on the enemy. DDR essentially turns his entire team into what he used to be. His S1 now, where he gets the detonate stuff, is just literally everybody else on his team. So if you have a Bellion that just goes and you throw Venoms on everybody, boom, detonated. Everyone has injury now, right? It is going to be quite insane. And once you got the injury applied, all of DDR's subsequent turns, you can just deal more injury damage. More damage based on the injuries, right? This is not going to actually inflict injuries, but you guys know what I mean. Yeah, this actually is pretty good because you get cooldowns now for this, reduced by 1 turn, which is quite nice. And notice how all the focus is gone. S1 doesn't give focus anymore, S2 doesn't give focus, and the S3 doesn't consume focus. DDR is no longer confined to using his S2 and S1 early on the game. Now his S3 is actually huge. So look here. We have the S3, the Cloud of Death, where before you would deal damage equivalent to 80% of the target's injuries, right? Now you will be able to strip 2 buffs from all enemies. Strip 2 buffs from all enemies. Keep in mind, this is a hit that does not, this is an attack that does not hit the opponent physically, right? It's a non-attack skill. So much like how Aeola screws you over, DDR essentially does the same thing, right? You know how Sharoon just strips all your buffs? Sharoon has to hit you, DDR doesn't. Now he is limited in the fact that he can only dispel 2 buffs, much like Aeola, but it's still a lot of buffs, and a lot more buffs than what people probably open up with. If you have immunity and a barrier, for example, goodbye to those. And that was the main thing with DDR. If you were against immunity units, you were screwed. Unless you brought another stripper along for the ride, you weren't really getting any extra debuffs on the opponents, right? And the other thing with Pestilence is that when you had Venom, a bunch of Venom stacks on somebody, if they can cleanse it, full cleanse the team with a Destina S3, a Calrix S3, it's over. All of your hard work of stacking those debuffs, gone, right? So this actually makes DDR much more proactive and gives him a lot of counterplay for his counters, so, which is pretty good. Quite interested in this. It's a pretty long cooldown, 5 turns, right? But keep in mind, you do gain combat readiness from his S2. You do get the turn cycle, and I'm kind of interested to see if people are going to be building speedy DDRs or if they're going to stick to their counter builds. I feel like counter can still have some merit, especially because he can still sleep and he can still deal quite a bit of damage, right? But only time will tell, and I'm definitely going to be testing him out in RTA after the buff. Next up, we're going to breeze through some of these because they're not as impactful to PvP, but Araminta here, huge update with her. She no longer detonates her burn effects. They actually added this to Araminta, which is funny, like a few balance patches ago. Now they're taking it away. And the reason for that is that they want to make sure that people who are trying to use her in PvE, that you get to stack those burns up. There's not many units in the game, actually, that can just continuously stack burns up. Which is funny, like Emma Kawazu detonates his burns, Carrot detonates her burns, they made Araminta detonate her burns. ML Araminta does not, but she's mostly used to stun things rather than burn. Araminta here specializes in burn, so this is pretty nice to see. You can still cheese stages now with her in terms of stacking up buffs. And I don't know if this is going to be relevant for this Rift run. We can see if after this she can actually be used and diversify some team comps. Because people were talking about her in regards to Rift before. She does get a extra little combat readiness for the caster by 5%. Not a huge tweak, but that basically just took that EE and just put its effect into her kit, because it's probably what a lot of people were using before anyway. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Araminta now can be used in PvE. Hooray. Next up, we have a change to one of my favorite ML4s in the entire game, Screw Aeola. Even though he shares the same stat line with Aeola, she basically just stole his stats and just was better. But whatever you can build Aeola at, you can build Broman at, and he is now just flat out immune to silence. He's immune to silence, and the effect of combat readiness debuffs inflicted on him is decreased by 100%, which means he can't get pushed back. This is interesting because you could technically kind of use him as a Zeo counter if you build him fast enough. Now, are you going to be able to build him fast enough? Is he consistent enough for that? Who knows? But I'm still going to try and test him out anyway. I think he looks really, really fun. I want to see if he is actually a, kind of plausible unit to bring into Zeo. Who knows? Next up, though, we have his S3. So what his S3 does, he attacks everybody, dispels 2 buffs, and he had 75% chance to silence for 2 turns. That's the main thing. It's 2-turn silence, not 1 turn. That's what makes Broman different. He's actually one of the few units that can just CC somebody for 2 turns, right? It's like Wanda with a 2-turn stun, or Winter with a 2-turn stun, right? Broman can do a 2-turn silence, which can actually be really big. If you can land this on a hand guy, for example, and he has his S3 available, he can't cleanse himself fully, right? Normally, if you silence him, he can cleanse the silence by reducing all of his debuff durations by a turn, and then he can pop his S3. Not the case with Broman. But they just added a defense break to his kit, which is kind of nice. They've been kind of doing this with a lot of units. They're just kind of adding just defense breaks to people. And they're like, yeah, well, hopefully you can use them in PvP and just shred people up with this. We'll see. We'll see. Broman is a really fun control unit. And in a control team, if you can defense break somebody, it's terrifying, right? You deal so much more damage while they can't do anything. It's pretty good. But only time can tell. Broman, again, has the same stat line as Aeola, for any reference out there. Whatever you can build your Aeola as, Broman has the same exact stats. Alright, next up, we got Cirilla. Now, Cirilla here, she actually just gets increased damage and increased soul burn damage. I really don't know what they're going for her with this. I guess October passed, we didn't get a Halloween side story, so they're like, let's buff Cirilla. Seems like a pretty relevant time. Maybe some people were going back and playing the side story and getting her. Who knows? But for you Cirilla fans out there, I know my good friend Joe, who's in my guild, he uses Cirilla from time to time in RTA. Congrats, you got a new toy to play with. All right, but moving on, we actually have this right here, 2 artifact changes. So the first one is Bastion of Perlucia. This is actually pretty big. So Bastion of Perlucia, at the start of the turn, it grants the caster and the ally in the back row immunity for 1 turn and a barrier equivalent to 20-30% of the caster's max health for 2 turns. The main thing about this is that Bastion no longer grants to the highest attack and it grants to the caster. Which means now if you put this on somebody, like a knight, let's say Trollmaker Crozet, for example, is the first one that comes to my mind, you can now protect, like, Destina in the backline. You can now protect Hand Guy in the backline. You can do so many different things with this, and it's absolutely insane. You can have bruisers that you bring along, right? Bastion of Perlucia is really versatile now. You can use this on bruisers that build HP scaling. As long as you put them in the backline, they're going to get this effect, and it's huge. It's a really big change. I think a lot of units don't want to be built with immunity because you don't want to give up a lot of those stat lines that you can get. You know, bruisers wanting pen set or stuff like that. Or even support units like Destina, you want to get like a res set or something if you're boosting up your res, or you want a defense or HP set to boost up your bulk. This allows you to get immunity, right? Especially if they're part of your core team and your core knight has Bastion. This will boost up your give you free immunity on 2 units for the price of 1 artifact. It's huge. Definitely expect to see a rise in use of Bastion of Perlucia in RTA. And even to screw people over in things like guild or defenses. Alright, next up, we got Durandal. It's an artifact you guys know that I love. Durandal I use on Dark Corvus, and I use on Axe God. So this is a direct buff to Axe God, and you're definitely going to see Axe God more often on the channel. After being attacked, you essentially gain half that combat readiness that you originally would gain when you were below 75% health, and the rest of that combat readiness gain you'll get if you are below 75% health, right? So if I have one maxed out on Axe God, every time he gets hit, he's going to gain 8% combat readiness. For nothing, just for getting hit, which is great. And then if you're below 75% health, they'll add 8% onto that, so I get 16% total boost. So pretty good. They've done this with a lot of artifacts in the past. They've done this with like Wind Rider for like splitting the effects up. You gain some attack just by having the artifact, and then you'll get additional attack when you proc under a certain condition. Right, Little Queen's Huge Crown, for example, does that too. You do like 12% extra damage overall, and then you do an additional 12% if the target has a barrier, right? It makes it so the artifacts aren't just completely dead and worthless, especially early on in the match. Axe God can definitely benefit from turn cycling, especially if you build him with 0 speed. Dark Corvus as well. Okay, and last but not least, we have the biggest change that I think we have here for this update, and it is the sleep change. Sleep is now absolutely insane, and it is not as common of a debuff, I think, as stun. I think a lot more units have stun than they do sleep, but sleep is insane now. You now reduce evasion by 100%. That's right, you reduce evasion by 100%. What that means is that screw Raiden, screw Rylet, and screw all those things that have evasion buffs on them. You can hit them all the time if they're asleep, which makes sense. I mean, they're literally sleeping. You think if you're trying to assassinate Rylet in his sleep that he's gonna roll over and like just teleport behind you? Like, yeah, so sleep is actually pretty good here now. One thing that I want to emphasize is that when you decrease evasion, right, by 100%, it means you're increasing your hit chance, essentially, by 100%. And that means that if you're at an elemental disadvantage, you can now hit the opponent and still crit them, right? It also decreases critical hit resistance, which is great because there's anti-crit running around with ML Landy. That's not super important, though. This evasion is, right? This evasion coupled with the critical hit resistance means that you can actually, if you got a fire unit, if an ice unit's asleep, you're critting them, you're hitting them, they can't dodge. There's no 50% chance to miss there. And I think that's a pretty big deal that people are not considering as much or putting as much emphasis on. One of course, DDR got buffed here. DDR can put things to sleep. Fantastic. I think Fumir is coming out and she also puts people to sleep, I think, in one of her skills. I don't remember. But we also have a lot of other units. Shuna, for example, AoE sleep. AoE sleep. Non-attack skill. Just put the entire enemy team to sleep. That's pretty big, right? You can hit Aidens and stuff now. You just put her to sleep, just slap her. I think this is, I don't think people are putting enough emphasis on this. Sleep is going to be a very terrifying debuff to go up against, and I think it's definitely going to change how people play and draft into certain matchups. So definitely be on the lookout for this because it is very important moving forward. And if you guys have other units that you think definitely got a slight boost besides Shuna from the sleep buff, let me know in the comment section down below. But yeah, these are all the proposed balance adjustments. I know I am a little disappointed that Crow, Ravi, Alencia, and Closer Charles, who apparently were going to get stuff in the Awaken potential update, did not get their buffs here, but I can understand why they didn't. The reason being obviously that you don't want to rush out balance adjustments like that, and you definitely want to have them tested and tweaked and perfected before you release them. So I would expect that in the next update, we'll probably get them. There's no guarantee, but just to be reasonable and, not just bash Smallgate for everything that they do, like people like to do nowadays, understand that they're probably in shock and they have to rework a bunch of things because they canceled that entire Awaken Potential update. So they have a lot of work to do behind the scenes, a lot of cleanup, a lot of damage control, but yeah, I think this is a pretty nice balance adjustment update, and I'm really excited to use DDR. But let me know what you think of this update in the comment section down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more Epic 7 content. And until next time, take care.